Okay, friends, this is part two of a two-part video. The previous episode, we were visiting this page briefly, War Against the Weak, a page promulgating the book by Edwin Black, and it's the best book on eugenics, says the website, and I would tend to agree. And this is a doorway into a certain kind of racism that continues to play in the background in a lot of dimensions. Now, this Edwin Black is the same guy. What I'm doing in this video, by the way, is I'm kind of coiling up in the humanities, like in history literature. We're studying dark, edgy stuff that's disturbing, because we need to. History is kind of a horror movie, and we're spending time in it to learn from it. So we coil up in the humanities, and then we jump over this chasm into STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I call the humanities path to STEM, and you understand all this a lot better if you remember or pick up on that there was this writer named C.P. Snow, and his focus, he's famous for the meme of this chasm between path and STEM, between the humanities and the um, engineering, science, whatever. Like we have this almost like a slice down our brain or through the culture that puts the humanities on one side and technologists on the other. And where you really get this played out, I think, is in the Time Machine by H.G. Wells, where he extrapolates forwards, and the engineers have become the Morlocks, and they live underground, and the humanities are the Eloi people who are kind of shallow and they live on the surface, whatever. And that's a weird reversal, right? Because people tend to say engineers are shallow. That's kind of the stereotype. We will elder you, you engineers. If you use master slave in your terminology, we will come and tell you that is wrong because we are the humanities people and you are but shallow engineers. You get a lot of that around Princeton, I must say. And I wasn't even an engineering major. I just hang out at the Equad a lot. That's what we call it, the Equad. Now, this Edwin Black is also the guy who wrote IBM and the Holocaust. And what I want to, and that doesn't go, huh? So interesting that this website has broken links, but such is life. So where I want to take you is back to 2009. And there's a Python for Teachers two-part video. Steve Holden is there with me. I do most of the talking, but he's the constructive backup. It was a co-presentation. And what I'm talking about at length is kind of a big curriculum where you do have SQL, structured query language, but you take the opportunity at that time when you're talking about some deep engineering thing to do lore around it, because I have this model that the best way to learn and teach is to oscillate between kind of a lore axis and a heads down technical axis, like purely skills learning. But you got to motivate that and contextualize that with storytelling. So I have an oscillating arrow, you could say, understanding there's a limited bandwidth to what we can take in, how fast, and so on. But you get more bandwidth if you keep the oscillation going. It's like when you work out at a gym, you don't just do bench presses to total exhaustion and nothing else. You do a rhythm and you do some, this kind of work and then rest and then another kind of work. You build up a multitasking routine at a gym and you come out better rounded. The whole idea of liberal arts, well rounded, so forth. So you do your multitasking in a creative manner that is synergetic, right? And that's what they're talking about in the Fourth Way books, that, instead of just thinking in terms of motion, emotion, and intelligence, there's a synergy of the three that makes a fourth, where you can more quickly accelerate out of identifying with yourself as this or that national or religion or, all the things we dress up as, our costumes. And that's what we also track on database. In other words, inside of structured query language comes the topic of labeling people. And it's like, oh, you're a Nazi or you're a Republican or whatever. Do we put that in the database? Do we put political party in your medical database? Usually we haven't thought about doing that, but we might. We might put your religion in there. I think when they come to give you last rites on the battlefield after you've been wounded fatally and they need to say some final words, it's good if they can look on their phone and get your religion right. And so then they have something they could put in your ear maybe that says something you might understand. I don't know. They might get it wrong. So SQL is a place, I'm saying, to revisit the history of sorting people, branding them, and treating them differently depending on how we've sorted them, how we see them. Oh, you're a citizen. You are my equal. Oh, you're not a citizen. I'll treat you like crap. Not you're a guest at my place. No idea of treating guests with respect. In some cultures, it depends on your culture. What's your ethnicity? And do we put that in the database? See, that's the whole question. What is it we're trying to record again? Your what? Your race? Your ethnicity? Do we really know? Or do we just need a lot of checkboxes because we're busy bureaucrats? We have programs that depend on checkboxes and checkboxes that depend on programs. It can be a range of things. That's why I like small experiments. Like, I'm fine with trying all kinds of weird stuff as long as you're not condemning an entire territory of vast size, right? Things are going to try and fail. If people want to do like some kind of all Jewish state, why don't we start small in Minnesota somewhere? 30 square miles. I don't know. Just throwing that out. All kinds of things we need to try on a small scale and maybe lots of trials, right? Because some could work better than others. So we can scatter the idea of a pure religious state has got to be tried in a lot of ways, right? It's like everybody wants to try it. Christians want their own little Christian state, and they have one. They have one. It's called the Vatican. But a lot of people can't get into that, and they're not really Roman Catholic, so back to square one. And companies are like that. Gee, if we could only just have our company philosophy just be the religion around here. And so you have all these like network nations. They don't have contiguous boundaries, and so you don't see them on a world map. And one reason on the Fuller projection we take away the world map of nations is just so you'll remember that there's all kinds of stuff going on under those, right? The so-called proverbial what's under the rocks, right? We'll take the rocks off and we'll see, we'll look. So here, I'm going to wind up here. I'm going to give you two ways to jump from the humanities to STEM. When you're teaching about databases, which is part of supermarket math in my world, comes everywhere, right? Databases are big, graph databases, SQL databases. At that point, you may want to jump into the abuses of such database tracking and vulnerabilities and concerns and privacy issues, the whole spectrum, from deliberate sequestering of people who meet certain criteria, treating them as slaves and worse, all the way through very sensitive medical data that really does save lives because you get personalized medicine more than ever, right? There's like good and bad to storing people's DNA, etc. Then there's a happy connection. That was kind of dark, talking about all that stuff, right? The Nazis and stuff. But when we get to Unicode, which is a whole other piece of computer science, very cool, talks a lot about permutations and mappings, and it's very set theory. Like Unicode has a lot of content, and it's also a happy story because it's all the world languages getting together and finding sort of accommodating one another in a big database where we're not fighting. We're just able to use emoji or Klingon or whatever is in there. And there's room to grow. So Unicode is kind of a happy United Nations, more like we do get along if we want to. Like humans have done global things at a global scale and are now reaping the benefits. And I'm not saying there aren't problems with Unicode. Right here at the workshop, some of my students wanted to talk about issues with Unicode, things that are bad about it, and that's totally permitted. I'm not like saying, oh, love this or leave this, right? It's just here's a happy story, whereas with the SQL, I tend to get kind of dark. And the whole point is when we get to STEM, we're not checking our values and ethics at the door. There could be that sort of motto over the gate. As you cross over this bridge from humanities into technology, thou must surrender thy values. Well, we don't do that, no. We come in well prepared, we've been studying, we've been doing our homework. And what is our bridge? So final point is, this is where the Bucky stuff comes in. We're coming in through number sequences, crystallography, and the octet truss, you could call it, right? Just to be clear, we're really cool with Alexander Bell being into it, octet truss. Let's start with Bell and go to images. So put yourself in this neighborhood and you see where we're coming from in terms of jumping over from path into STEM. And then we can go back again, right? So we have an evolved way of talking and thinking about a lot of geometry that we learned in literature class. We already have all this down before we even start to look at STEM. This is stuff we learned in the humanities side. Humanities has grown its own indigenous geometry. That's my thesis. And you can say that's stupid, that's not true, but check out German philosophy, German language philosophy, don't just check out English philosophy. I'm not necessarily depending on the Anglos to be up to date, okay? But there's a lot here. Do some homework, and you'll see that integrating the two sides of the chasm per CP Snow has come a long way since then. We have done a very good job, I would say, of building a bridge. All right, hope that was elucidating. Talk to you soon.